Hello, everybody. This is a short note on spatial clustering. Let me switch to slides. So, my name is Katarzyna Kopczewska. I am from the University of Warsaw. I would like to talk shortly in 10 minutes about the spatial clustering, mostly based on distance. So, in fact, that material covers only clustering based on distance. Here we can talk about K-means clustering, PAM and Clara clustering, and hierarchical clustering. Of course, there are many other clustering topics like based on density and geometric approach with circles, like DB-scan, optics, SAT-scan, BNS, and geographically analysis machine, spatial temporal DB-scan. We can talk about the clustering based on network, like the Voronoi or Dirichlet tessellation-based clusterings, and also on spatial clustering in RNA analysis for biology. But we want to talk only on clustering of point patterns. If we see the points which are located on the plane, it can have optionally the values assigned, and we are interested to group those points or values or both into clusters. So, how and what we can cluster? So, first of all, we can simply cluster the points geolocated in space. So, in fact, we are clustering the geocoordinates like longitude and latitude. We can cluster also the values, only values, regardless without considering their location. So if we have the multivariate characteristics of observation, so many variables, we can cluster those values. There will be, of course, no spatial aspect considered. We can, of course, cluster the values and then finally map them in the geolocation. So the non-spatial clusters will be perceived like spatial. And finally, we can both cluster geolocated points and values using the methods which can jointly include those both information. In distance-based clustering, the most important thing is, of course, distance. We call it the distance matrix. So we have a lot of concepts of measuring the distance between 2 points. So in the top figures, I've just plotted and mentioned with formulas only the 3 most common, the linear ones. So Euclidean distance is go straight ahead. Yeah, we simply go the shortest way from point to point, and this is the most popular metric of distance. The second very popular metric is Manhattan distance, like a city distance, which means we can go or move around only the edges of the grid. So, of course, the distance with Manhattan is longer, because you cannot go the shortest way. The third one, which is plotted, is Minkowski distance. Minkowski distance is like the generalization of the previous two. So the Euclidean and Manhattan distances can be expressed with the Minkowski distance depending on P, which you will get in the formula. And Minkowski distance gives you the curve. So depending on that P, the curve will have its shape. Additionally, we can talk also about the Gopher distance, which is mainly for qualitative data. We can have the Mahalanobis distance, which includes the correlations between the variables. And finally, we can use the Hamming distance to compare the binary vectors. So as you see, there are a lot of concepts of distance, and all of them can be included in clustering. So the first method, the K-means clustering. What we do, we assume some K points, the K cores on the plane. They can be in any location, so any location is allowed. Secondly, we calculate the distance between the points and the cores. So as you see in the middle figure with arrows. So what we get finally is in the data analysis, we get the observations which are in the first column. Then we calculate the distance from the first core, the second core, and the third core. Yeah, if we have 3 cores in that example. And what we do, we try to find the minimum distance. So for each observation, we find the minimum distance to the cores and select that core as the best. But this is the preparatory stage of clustering. What we do else? Yeah, we try to in fact minimize the total distance. So in fact, we are running optimization to find the best location of our red points. And the criteria is that the total minimum distance will be the smallest. So in fact, as you see on the last figure, we can shift our assumed course to the best locations to obtain the setting in which the course minimize the total distance. And this is K-means clustering, which is extremely popular in analysis. Of course, here we see the approach for the coordinates only. The same may happen in multi-dimensional space. So simply you have to imagine the third, fourth, and the next dimension. We can have the partitioning around meadows. It's called PAM. PAM is almost the same as K-means with small difference. In PAM, you cannot choose your points absolutely freely, but you have to choose the points which are existing. So your core cannot be any point on the plane, but one of the points which are already given in your sample. So you do the looking for the optimal location in iterations. So this is the main difference. This is not optimization like in K-means, but iterations. So iteratively, you assume three possible core locations. And again, you do exactly the same. So you calculate the distance from each point to each of those core points. Finally, we summarize the total location, the total distances, and if we have all possible combinations of cores, we can find the best iteration which gives the total minimum distance from all the points to their cores. So in fact, we will get also the cores which are located in existing points, and they will be minimizing the total distance. You have also here the term Clara. Clara is the same as PAM, but for big data. So this is like the equivalent method, but it works on subsamples selected in sampling. So in fact, it chooses a portion of the points. Later is doing the same analysis, and the rest of the points which were not involved in the whole analysis are assigned to the clusters on the basis of k nearest neighbors. So for each point which extra come back, in fact, to our sample, we check who is the closest point, and the point is assigned to the cluster as the closest neighbor. Why do we have to deal with the issue of big data? Just remember that the distance metrics, so distance measures which are based on the distance metrics, have usually a problem with the memory in the computers, because n by n metrics of distances is usually very demanding, computationally demanding. So for small samples, K-means and PAM are absolutely enough. If you have a big data, just go to Clara. And we can go to next point, hierarchical clustering. Hierarchical clustering also gives the same answer, how to cluster in groups the points, but the algorithm works absolutely differently. So in fact, we start with so-called singletons. Singletons are individual points, and we assume that each point is individually in its own cluster. What we do in the second step, we find a nearest neighbor. A nearest neighbor which will make a group with a given point. Here, the picture is somehow simplifying that the points are grouped in two, but this is the way it works. In the next step, we add, so we try to group the points in bigger clusters. In fact, the operation goes iteratively. So when starting with singletons, in each iteration, we add one next point to the clusters which exist, to the closest clusters. So the classification, in fact, is growing. So the cluster groups are becoming bigger. And finally, we get all the points clustered in one single cluster. So the output of that clustering procedure is the dendrogram, a dendrogram, which you see on the last figure. So in fact, the of the figure is the last cluster. So all the points are in last cluster, in one single cluster. If you look at the bottom of the dendrogram, these are the singletons. So each observation is its individual cluster. And we can see on the basis of the clusters how they group and what are the very visible clusters. So in fact, we finally cut the tree, which means we go with the horizontal line at the high of the tree, choosing how many clusters we want to see. And vertical lines are the number of clusters we can consider. So again, very nice method of hierarchical clustering. So what to do else? If we have the clustering of geolocated points, you see on the example here that the points can be simply grouped into colors. So the straightforward implementation of clustering works well in case of catchment areas like schools, post office, supermarkets, or sales representatives. So you can easily divide the points into coherent groups which minimize the distance. What is more, this is machine learning algorithm. So if you have a new point which appears in your data set, the algorithm can predict to which cluster given point will be assigned. So that is visible on the second figure when you see the new points in red and they are assigned to some coloristic clusters. So the minor point of that method is that you should know a priori the number of cores. And then the Kmeans optimizes the partitioning. So sometimes, of course, you know that number. So if these are schools or post offices, you know them. But sometimes you don't know how many K cores you want to have. So again, it might be somehow problematic. So usually researchers complain about it and look for some clue how to set the key. It can be optimized. So if you checked all the potential clusterings with, let's say, 1 cluster, 2 clusters, 3 clusters, 7 clusters, 15 clusters, you can find the best division. But also you may find the methods which are doing the same jointly. So the method by Brinikamp from 2007, this is the dual approach. So firstly, you go with the density cluster with geographical analysis machine or kernel density, which shows you where the clusters are, the density clusters. So you got the number of clusters and also the locations of geocoordinates. And you can use those information in the second step in K-means clustering by setting the number of clusters and also the initial centroids for optimization. Then the optimization goes quicker. If we are talking about the clustering of values and mapping them as clusters, so in fact, in current literature, the most popular application of that approach is in case of geographically weighted regression, the GWR models, which are producing, in fact, the individual local beta coefficients for each variable and for each observation. So if you estimate that kind of models, you get plenty of coefficients, which are in fact difficult to summary. So literature mostly goes in that way that the GWR coefficients are clustered with one of the methods which were presented. This is mostly done for hedonic models for the housing markets, and the clusters are understood as submarkets. So as you see here on the figures, on the figure, you see simply the values of one single variable in that kind of model. This is the model for Warsaw. And if you cluster 20 variables which were in that model, you see that they built clusters. And this is really amazing. Yeah, because mostly the variables and the clustering had nothing to do with space. Yeah, these were simply like the price of flat, the area, the standard, and so on. And those coefficients, when clustered, give continuous spatial clusters, which is really amazing in that method, and that happens very often. What we can do else? We can do also clustering the locations and values jointly. So usually this is the dilemma, what to concentrate on. So you can mirror this dilemma, but by mixing both clusterings. And there are many approaches for that. So Chavent in 2018 proposed the cluster Geo, which runs separately clusterings for values and for locations, and then it uses like the weighted dissimilarity matrices with the mixing parameter alpha, which is setting the or finding the best mixture of both clusterings. The secondly is the extension of that, the bootstrap class Geo, presented last year by Di Stefano, and it generates many potential partitionings, like in the bootstrap. And finally, links the spatial and non-spatial components with the Hamming distance. And finally, with one of the criteria, which is the inertia, minimizes the within cluster inertia, and that helps in selectioning the components of both approaches. There are also the old algorithms which are implemented. The scatter and the red cap, they are built on the trees. The trees are later cut and pruned, which helps also in getting that classification. And we ever use those things? Yeah, it is coming in the literature. So I would like to share with you the 3 examples on which use in regional science the clusterings. One of those very interesting is the fire distribution in Sardinia, published by Rocco and al. In 2015. What they did, they used the hierarchical clustering with the dendrogram for the features of the territory. So they were using the phenological metrics, the spatial temporal dynamics, the vegetation data, the satellite photos, and they obtained like the classification of the territories just on the basis on their feature. So in fact, they've obtained like the 4 groups of territories, and it was mapped. You see in the top figure the belongingness to the clusters due to these features. And for each group, they've checked the frequency of fires, so they could assess the natural conditions and their impact for the fires. So in fact, the fire proneness. So you see that in the bottom table, how many fires they were noted over 10 years, and you see a lot of differences between both groups. Second example is by Miller et al. Published in 2013. And this is on spatial drift in the demand for public transportation tickets. What they did, they estimated the GWR model for the demand on the bus tickets in Dresden. And they've been using the point and district data. You see in the bottom figure the data collection and the map they had. Secondly, they, on the basis of their GWR coefficients, they clustered them, but individually for each variable. And you see that in the vertical panel, you see the values of the coefficients for given variable, and then the clusters which are separating the areas within the city. And in the second phase, they estimated like the general specific spatial econometric model, the standard one like the spatial Darwin model and spatial Darwin error model, with the same variables as in GWR, and that part was to capture spatial autocorrelation. But additionally, from the first stage, they've added dummy variables for GWR clusters. So the belongingness to the cluster, was expressed like a dummy variable, and that captured the spatial heterogeneity in that model, and that really helped. The last model, the last example is my example on spatial temporal stability of housing markets. So the housing submarkets which were already presented can be get as follows. If you have like the panel data for 10 years, you can estimate for each year the individual hedonic annual GWR model. And then, of course, you can cluster the coefficients within that model. So you get the 10 clusterings for each year individually. So what we can do else, we can compare with rand index and Jaccard similarity, which are the measures dedicated to comparison of clusterings, the partitionings, for how much the clusters are overlapping from period to period. So that helps in checking the spatial temporal stability of submarkets to be able to guess if the submarkets move over the space. So, if you're interested how to do the things, mostly the implementations are in R. So in R software, you will find, in fact, everything what I was talking about. So the basic methods are available in the packages like the stats, the cluster R, the cluster FPC, factor extra, factor minor. So these are the typical unsupervised learning packages for typical clusterings without any spatial components because you don't need it. But of course, if you want to go into the methods which combine the things, you can go to Geo and RGeoDA packages which allow for the mixture of the approaches. There are also more options. You can get the fuzzy geographically weighted clusterings in spatial class package and spatial oblique decision trees in SPODT package, which are also based on the classifications. And those non-covered topics, if you are interested for the network and density-based clusterings, are also widely available in R, in DBScan, GeoGem, MapGem, Spatial CPI, Spatial AP, RSATScan, GraphScan, RFlexScan, Scan Statistics packages. So you have really a great choice of tools to do the things. If you need literature, let me present at least 4 books which cover the topics. So all of them, so each of them is different. The book, my book, The Applied Spatial Econometrics and Statistics in R by Routledge, it shows the details, how to run the analysis, how to interpret the results, how to go technically with things. If you want more general applications, more theory, more generalizations, more applied versions of that and examples, you can go to the last 3 books, like the Handbook of Applied Spatial Analysis, which is well-known book on software tools, methods, and applications. You can go to Spatial Discovery in Spatial Data, which is showing a lot of aspects of getting this information from spatial data, from different formats of spatial data. And spatial data mining, of course, also shows the theory and application, how to go with those topics. I hope you will find it interesting and will be successful in your research with using the spatial clusterings. Thank you a lot.